Kristine.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Kristine Ford and welcome to our first Accessibility Hui of 2020. Wahoo! So it's all about accessible information today, hosted by our wonderful web team, digital services team, and the digital services team. And I'd like to say a special thanks to them for hosting this Hui for us and putting in such a great amount of effort to bring us information on how we can make sure the information that we provide is accessible for everybody. And I'd also like to thank them for putting in the special effort to, at last minute, turn the session into a webinar so that we could not have a huge gathering of people in one room. So this is obviously a first time for us, so we hope that it will be clear for everybody. Just with questions, there is a the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. So at the end of each presentation, we'll have time for questions. So just click on those that Q&A button and ask your question, and then the presenter will be able to respond directly to your question. Okay, so we'll get started. So Matt's going to introduce the agenda, and I hope you really enjoy and get something out of today, and we can all be a bit more accessible with our information. Matt.
Kia ora everyone. Just before we jump into it, as Kristine said, there's been kind of last minute changes to turn this into a webinar. So I thank you in advance for your patience for any of the technical stuff that doesn't work exactly as it should. We're flying by the seat of our pants a little bit. So the slides in the main presentation, you can see at the bottom of this title slide. By clicking on that link, you can get to the slides that you're looking at now. The video link, we're going to attempt to record the session. That link doesn't work at the moment because we haven't had the session, so there can't be a video. So if you go there, nothing will happen. But by this afternoon, or if not, then by tomorrow, if you go to that link, you should be able to see a video of the session. Sorry, and my name is Matt Lane. I'm the manager of the digital services team. That's one of the teams inside the Smart Council business unit. Within digital services, one of the teams is the website team, and they're the main team who have done all of the work for this session today. There we go. So the agenda for today. So the first presenter will have, in some ways, the division of people we have is we have. Sorry, I'm just clicking around. No, okay. The agenda we have today is the expert, the practitioners, and then the kind of sub-practitioners and benefactors, and I'll explain that a little bit more. So Jason Kiss, if you've ever tried to get good at a subject matter, and then you've asked someone who's good at that thing, who should I talk to? Who knows more about this than you do? And they'll tell you about a person, and then you talk to that person and you say, so who knows more about this subject matter than you? And you keep going down the track. Eventually you'll find yourself at the person in the country who knows more about a thing than anyone else. Jason Kiss is that person for web content accessibility. He's worked at the Department of Internal Affairs on several occasions. He's worked at the Blind Foundation. He's always, every road as far as digital accessibility ends up on Jason's door. The second presenter we have today, and so Jason's going to give us an overview of web accessibility, what it is and how it works and how we can do it. Jane Hadaway is the team leader from the website team inside the council. So it's Jane's team who look after the main website for the council, wellington.govt.nz. And web accessibility of content is a big part of what they do. And then Kyal Little is from the council's contact centre. So Kyal takes telephone calls as a CSR, a customer service representative, so speaks to customers on the telephone on our behalf. And then at the end, I'll bring us back around for take-home action points. What can you do in your day-to-day work that will improve accessibility? So I'm going to hand over to Jason in half a minute. So just to repeat, in case it wasn't explicitly clear, Jason is one of those people that I have a huge amount of admiration for. He's helped me. I've been trying to learn about web content accessibility, and it's a really complex, big area. So it's been, you know, years and years, and he's always so patient, so helpful, as well as just being a super expert. So he's a lovely balance of those two things. He's currently at the Department of Internal Affairs, and I think if you email webaccessibility@dia.gov.nz, it goes straight to Jason. So Jason, if you turn on your microphone, and I'm going to switch the presenting to you. Stand by.
No, thanks for that, Matt, and thanks for those very generous words. I'll have to try and live up to those now over the next 35, 40 minutes.
So I'm just switching to Jason as the presenter. Once again, I know I need to get out of this thing. Stop share. There we go. Okay, yes, now we're making some progress.
Now I can share. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Jason Kiss, everyone.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks again. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to the topic of web accessibility for the next 30 minutes or so, and ideally wrap up around 1:40, 1:45, leaving 5-10 minutes for questions. If you do have questions, feel free to post those throughout the session, and I'll try to respond to those as soon as I can, or as best I can at the end. So, right, to start with, accessibility, what is it? And what is this thing on the top of the screen? It says A11Y question mark. A11Y is really just a numeronym, and you might have seen it already on Twitter or elsewhere. It's just a short form, it's an abbreviation of sorts for the word accessibility. And we call it a numeronym because what we do is we take the first and last letters of a very long word, we count up the number of letters in between, and we insert that number in between. And in the case of accessibility, which is 13 letters long, we cut out the 11 letters in the middle, stick that in the middle, and we have A11Y, which happily almost looks like the word ally or ally. And often people even pronounce it that way. But it's just a nice short way to reference accessibility without having to type this really cumbersome word. When you type it as many times as I do, you end up making the same mistakes over and over again. A11Y is just easier. So today, as I mentioned, I'm just quickly going to talk about what accessibility is and who's for, how disabled people access the web, and what we need to do in order to accommodate disabled people with our web content, and how we can embed accessibility practices into our regular day-to-day practices so that we can ensure that we deliver on accessibility. So definitions first. Web accessibility, what is it? On the screen, there's an image of a wheelchair ramp heading up to a restaurant next to a bunch of stairs, but right in the middle of the wheelchair ramp, there's a tree growing out of it. So obviously, it's kind of a joke. It's an accessibility fail, we would call that. The wheelchair ramp is not able to be used for its designated purpose. But in the context of web content, web accessibility really is just about making sure that disabled people can use, interact with, comprehend your web content on an equitable level with everyone else. You might think of it as a subset of usability. It's usability for disabled people. It's really closely related to inclusive design, or maybe universal design you've heard of as well. This is a methodological approach about making sure that everyone, regardless of ability, disability, environment, device, whatever their context of use is, that everyone is able to use the product or service that you're designing. And so inclusive design, universal design are methodologies for achieving those broad outcomes. Accessibility, on the other hand, is itself an outcome. Something is accessible, it can work for disabled people, or it's not accessible. That's an whereas inclusive, the outcome one outcome of which is accessibility. But this is just to give you a sense of that space, these different approaches that are all somewhat related in the space of design where accessibility is concerned. Of course, we know that a very, very large range of people use the web. We have people with vision impairments. So for example, we're talking about people who are fully blind, but it's worth noting that most people with vision impairments aren't actually fully blind. That's a small number. Most people with vision impairments have some degree of vision, or what we say they have low vision. And so that's an important thing to recognize. Not all people with vision impairments are fully blind. They can see to varying degrees, some of them. And then we also have things like color blindness. Males in particular are prone to this because of the way the genetics works. But some people have a difficult time distinguishing between different colors, or they have certain types of color blindness that make all colors appear somewhat different than they would normally. Happily, there are tools that we can use to take it to look at how people with different forms of color blindness experience our web content. But that's an important vision impairment to be aware of. We also have hearing impairments. Here on the screen is the photo of two girls at a dance studio. They're just people at a dance studio. They have hearing impairments. Hearing impairments with vision impairments, people with hearing impairments, most of them are fully deaf. Most of them are just hard of hearing. They have some. Also talk about things like tinnitus or tinnitus, which is a high-pitched ringing in your ear. If you've ever been to a loud concert, chances are you walked away from that concert with that ringing in your ear. So just imagine that all the time or intermittently throughout your day. You can imagine how hard that would make it for you to focus or concentrate on things, and how you'd easily be distracted from other audio inputs. So that's also a hearing impairment. In the space of physical disabilities, there are those where people experience diminished motor control. So this isn't so much mobility impairment, which is about your ability to get around in a three-dimensional space, but really we're talking about motor control or motor impairments, which impact your ability to use your hands, which is how most people to some degree interact with computers and the web. This could be impacted by such conditions as arthritis or cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, muscular dystrophy. People may become paralyzed. All of those conditions can contribute to diminished motor control, making it difficult for people to interact with the devices that we use to control computers and to interact with web content. Then there's the largest group of disability or impairment, and that we would call the intellectual impairment or disability, or learning disabled. Often we refer to that. Historically, we've called it cognitive impairments, but people who have intellectual or learning disabilities prefer those terms as opposed to cognitive impairment. So language is important. Try to avoid cognitive disability or cognitive impairment and talk about learning disabled or intellectual disabilities at least. And this includes things like ADD and ADHD, so that's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, Down syndrome, dyslexia, dyscalculia, that's the numerical form issues, parsing text. People with dyscalculia have issues parsing numbers and maths. Learning disabilities, reading disabilities, memory loss, photosensitive epilepsy. Some people can have epileptic seizures triggered by their brains when they're subjected to really rapidly flickering visual stimuli. So that's another scenario. And again, people will suffer brain injuries. So if you suffer a traumatic brain injury, you may find yourself with some degree of learning or intellectual disability. So that's the largest group, and by far the most difficult disability to accommodate. But we'll talk more about how we can accommodate disabled users with our web content. Finally, we have this other group, not specifically any kind of regular or normally identified type of disability, but it turns out that we all, at various points in our lives, find ourselves in situations where we are effectively or de facto disabled. You might break your arm, your mouse hand. Then you have to use your other hand, which is not really used to using a mouse. What if you break both your hands? Then what do? You're temporarily disabled in that condition. Maybe carpal tunnel syndrome or RSI. I often find it kind of ironic that just by using a mouse every day, you can develop repetitive stress injury and become disabled in that hand when it comes to interacting with a computer. Even things like fatigue and lack of sleep or being hungover. When you're hungover, your brain is dehydrated and you are effectively intellectually disabled in that context. So these are temporary injuries or temporary conditions. There are also situational conditions. The picture on the screen comes from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, which is a great little toolkit, and they've done a great job in identifying different scenarios where people who aren't otherwise identified as being disabled are in fact disabled. So for example, a new parent, when you're holding a new life in your arms, you don't have the ability to easily use your hands to do other things. If you're driving a car and somebody's talking at you, or maybe your mobile phone is buzzing, you'll get distracted. In those sorts of scenarios, you are situationally disabled. So it's good to think about all these other ways where people find themselves in a situation where they have a condition about or a characteristic which, when faced with that particular designed environment, some kind of barrier is presented. And that's in fact how we define disability these days. We no longer think of disability under the medical model where a disability is something intrinsic or essential to that human being, something that we need to fix or cut out. Now we talk about disability as being basically a barrier presented by an environment or in the combination of the environment with a person and their particular circumstances. So for example, a blind person is visually impaired, but if they're dealing with a website that is built and designed to be accessible, they can use that with their screen reader software just as well as anybody else can interact with that website. They're not disabled in that context. And so that's what web accessibility is really about. It's about diminishing those barriers. It's about designing our environment, in this case, a web page or a website, so that anybody can come along and regardless of their particular set of circumstances, their abilities, disabilities, they're not going to suffer any barriers in that situation. In New Zealand, we have a relatively high percentage of people with disabilities. We have about 24% of the population has self-identified as being disabled in New Zealand. Note the higher number, 59% of people who are 65 years of age and older in this graph. So we have 11% of people aged 0 to 14 have a disability, 16% of people aged 15 to 44, 28% of people aged 45 to 64, and almost 60% of people who are aged 65 and over have a disability. This is from the 2013 Disability Survey by Statistics NZ. We also know that as the population ages, we're going to have a much greater proportion of the population who is going to be 65 years old or older. And so we're looking at a very significant proportion of our population over the next 20-25 years being disabled. And so we need to consider that. How do people with disabilities interact with the web? We call these things assistive technologies. Often they're called adaptive technologies, adaptive devices. A real basic one is the keyboard. A lot of people use the keyboard because they can't use a mouse. Maybe they don't have the fine dexterity to move a mouse pointer around the screen. So keyboards are really a basic kind of assistive tech. Large print keyboards for vision impaired people so that they can more easily see the keyboard. So here on screen is a large print keyboard. The keys are bright yellow, and all the numbers and letters on the keys are really big and bold, in black, easy to see. Here's a one-handed keyboard. So this is a right-handed keyboard, and its form factor enables someone who only is able to use one hand to basically access all the keys on a typical keyboard with this special keyboard. This comes in both right-handed and left-handed flavors. Some people can use a mouse, but they need special mice to help them perform their tasks. So here on the screen on the left is a trackball. It's a big trackball. Perhaps if you didn't have good use of your fingers, maybe you have arthritis, you might be using a trackball that you can move around. You can even just use the palm of your hand or your wrist. Maybe your arm ends at your wrist. You could still use the trackball to move that around and press the buttons. On the right is what we call a vertical mouse. So it's just rotated 90 degrees, and that lets you have your arm in its natural resting position, which is thumbs up from the table, and allows you to use your hand that way, as opposed to the normal mouse position, which is not a natural resting position, and which partially contributes to repetitive stress injury. I had that, and I used a vertical mouse for a couple of months, and all my pain went away. Head wands. This is a simple device you attach to your head. It's basically just a stick, a wand coming off of your head, and you can press buttons on a keyboard with that, or on a touch screen even. A variation on the head wand is the mouth stick. So that's just again, a stick that you hold in your mouth and use to type on a keyboard. Sometimes you combine your mouse to your head wand with a special keyboard that's easier individual and use those keys. The simplest of all accessible assistive technologies is the button switch. This is just a simple binary switch. On the screen here, on the left is the big red button. It's just a very large button. Combined with software that runs on your computer, you can basically do everything. The example on the right is connected to a longer arm and a clamp that, for example, you might connect to your wheelchair. If all you can do physically is move your head side to side, you could have this button set up right next to your head, and just by moving your head sideways, you could hit that button and thereby control your whole computer. There are variations on button switches. There's the sip and puff. So on the top of the screen here is someone blowing into a small device. I think it's a combination of a mouse pointer and a sip and puff. So with his mouth, he moves that pointer, he moves the device around, and that moves the mouse cursor around on the screen. And when he wants to click, he just blows some air. Perhaps if he wants to double click, he puffs or sips some air. And just by doing that, he can control the whole computer along with the software that he has installed. At the bottom, there's just a young girl. I like to imagine that she is looking at a computer monitor, and eye tracking software or hardware is looking at where her eyes are pointing and moving the mouse around on the screen in a relative fashion. And then she has a straw going into her mouth that she can use to sip and puff air, thereby basically clicking the mouse on the screen. Here on the screen is an eye blink switch. So this is just a fiber optic cable that basically terminates, you would wear a band around your head, and it would hold the fiber optic cable, the end of the cable, right outside of right next to your eye. And if all you could do was blink your eye, this would register those blinks as clicks of the mouse, for example, and with the software on the computer helping you, you'd be able to control the whole computer. If all you can do is slightly move your finger, you could use a proximity switch, which is just a small little device that registers almost imperceptible movements of your hand. next to that switch. And again, with the appropriate software, you could control the whole computer. Now showing on the screen is a very simple example of what we call switch scanning software. And this is the basic idea. This is how switch. So we have an on-screen, and what switch scanning software does is it visually highlights every row of content on your screen. Going down the screen's the thing that you're interested in, you would press the button. Then the switch scanning software highlights that row of things you're interested in. It breaks them into columns and highlights each individual column as it moves through that row. And again, when you get into the column that contains that thing you're interested in, you'd hit the button. And then it might even reduce that into a number of smaller areas that it highlights. And when you finally get to the item that you're interested in this case, I'm trying to type a letter N as in Nancy, I would have to press the switch button several times. So I would press the switch button once here when it gets into that row, here again when it gets into that column, and here again when it finally isolates the letter N. So you can imagine that typing your life story would take a lot of work. This is one example of why other features like things like type ahead or auto suggest or autocomplete become very, very useful, particularly for people with switch scanning software. Then we have speech and voice recognition. A lot of people, not just people who, for example, can't easily control a mouse or a keyboard, but others as well. People with speech impediments or learning disabilities might try speech voice recognition. Dragon Naturally Speaking, that software is the most popular, still the most popular. But now we have this stuff embedded in our own systems. So for example, on Windows, we have Cortana. On Mac and iOS, we have Siri, and then we have things like Alexa and Google Voice Assistant. So the whole speech and voice recognition space is really moving quickly. And if we design our web content to be really well structured and accessible, it makes it easier for voice assistants like Alexa or Google Assistant to answer your questions by going to the web, finding a web page and reading it and repeating that important bit that answers your question back to you. So that's something good to keep in mind. One of the other benefits of accessible web content. And then there's screen readers. And I won't talk too much about these. Kyal will give us a demonstration. But screen readers are used obviously by people with vision impairments, but also by people with learning and reading disabilities who might want to have the web content on the page read out to them because they have a hard time reading it themselves or understanding it. So they want that additional support. On Windows, there's JAWS. I think that's the same screen reader that Kyal uses. It's one of the leading softwares. It's very expensive though. It's on the order of $2,000 New Zealand. But then we have also on Windows NVDA, which comes from NV Access. It's free. It's getting close to being just as popular as JAWS. It's actually designed and developed by a couple of blind fellows from Australia. On Mac devices, iOS, so on iPhones, iPads, and MacBooks, we have VoiceOver that comes built into it. On Android devices, we have TalkBack. And on Linux software, on Linux systems, there's Orca, which is a built-in screen reader. So there are screen readers there for vision impaired users and others to have the content of a web page read out to them. And again, for vision impaired users, they may be using screen magnifiers to enlarge certain portions of the screen quite significantly, sometimes 400 or 500 times, or 400, 500%, so that's 4 or 5 times. And they'll even have their nose right up to the screen and still have this magnifier zoomed in 4 or 5 times. And so they're seeing a very, very small portion of the screen at any one time. Just double checking the chat here to make sure no one's saying they can't hear me. That's good. So everyone can hear me, or I'm assuming so. And then finally, we have Braille displays, and these are used by people, typically people who are fully blind or have significant vision impairments and are have learned how to read and write in Braille. These are really expensive devices. The Braille display I'm showing at the top is a 40-cell Braille display, so that's basically 40 individual characters it can make. These are refreshable, and they usually work in tandem with screen reader software. So whatever the screen reader software would be normally speaking out loud, that could come through the refreshable Braille display. All the little pins at the bottom of the Braille display, they just refresh, indicating different characters, and the user just runs their fingers along back and forth, reading basically those characters. That one on the top, it's a 40-cell Braille display, 40 characters. It's about $7,000 US. The one on the bottom, it's a portable version. It only has 20 cells, but it has Bluetooth, so you could receive a text on your mobile phone. It would get Bluetoothed to your Braille display. You could read the text on your Braille display. Then you could use the buttons on your Braille display to type a response and then Bluetooth that back to your phone and have it sent on to your friend. So that's pretty neat. But again, that smaller one's about 3,000 US, not very affordable. Here we have an image of Neil Jarvis, an ex-employee from the Blind Foundation or Blind Low Vision New Zealand, holding the Orbit 20. This is a affordable Braille display, 20 characters, 20-cell Braille display, recently launched in the last few years. It's only $700 New Zealand. So all of a sudden, something that most people would be able to afford, if not with some reasonable subsidy from government, but certainly way more affordable than $3,000 or $7,000, especially considering that a large proportion of disabled people do not have ready income or employment. So what do we have to do to accommodate this broad range of users and all the technologies that they use? Well, there's one answer for that, and that's standards. Actually, there are more than one answer for that. One answer is standards. And for us, the standards that we point to are the standards behind all the technology that supports the web. So we should be using things like HTML and CSS and SVG and XML, all of these different technologies from the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the international standards body responsible for the web. We should be following those specifications and using the technologies appropriately. There's a quote showing on the screen here from Tim Berners-Lee. He's the one who invented the web. The quote is, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." So right from the very beginning, when Tim Berners-Lee was inventing the web, accessibility, making sure that everyone, regardless of their ability or disability, could access that content in the way that served them best, was an essential aspect of the web. It was designed into there from the beginning. Another W3C specification, and the one that specifically defines accessibility for our purposes, is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines from the W3C. This has 4 main principles: the POUR principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. All web content needs to be perceivable to me, regardless of what senses I have. So if I can't see, I need to be able to listen to it, for example. All web content needs to be operable. If I can't use a mouse, I need to be able to use a keyboard to interact with that. So we need to develop it so that it caters to those requirements. Everything needs to be understandable. I need to know how to use every web page. Your main menu might have a number of sections at the top. Those sections should remain the same on every web page that I go to. You shouldn't all of a sudden start renaming sections of a web page depending on what section you're in. That wouldn't make it understandable. When I complete a form and I make an error, you need to tell me that I made an error, what the error was, and how to fix it. You need to make all of that understandable to me as a user. And finally, things need to be robust. They need to work with the browsers that we have, that people are using, and the devices and the assistive technologies they're using, whether that's a switch or a screen magnifier or speech recognition. So that's how all of the requirements in WCAG, which is how we pronounce the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are organized. Incidentally, it's also what's required for the New Zealand government web accessibility standards. So all core government agencies are directed by Cabinet to meet WCAG 2.1. So I see it's 1:40 already. I've only got about 10 minutes left. I'm just going to quickly jump through the remaining portion of this presentation. But again, ask your questions or post your questions, and we'll see if we can get to those in the next couple of minutes. So it is worth noting, I think, that the New Zealand government web standards have been around since 2003, so 17 years. And in 2013, we basically renewed the web standards. We didn't really change them. We said, everyone got another 4 years to try and comply. But that didn't work either. Recently, a lot of government agencies, including some local governments, have signed the Accessibility Charter, which obligates them to, over the next 5 years, meeting the web standards alongside other outcomes. But the upshot, I guess, is that we're all struggling with this. It's technically complicated stuff, it's difficult, and everyone basically is in the same boat. We're just working to do our best. On the plus side, my impression is that over the past several years, and I think this very accessibility Hui that you've got going on is evidence to that, is that people involved in delivering web content, especially the practitioners, the designers, developers, content designers, they are all starting to equate quality with accessibility. And they really want to do their best. They're just struggling from a lack of support and guidance and knowing where to find that stuff. So some of the persistent accessibility issues we find are text alternatives for images, full keyboard access, and proper heading structure. If you were going to focus on accessibility for your web content, I would focus on these top 3 things. These are the most common issues, and they're quite significant issues for users that require accessibility accommodations. So how do we incorporate this stuff into our project? How can we embed accessibility into an organization's policies and procedures to ensure that it's addressed throughout the product's life cycle, from the very beginning, not just at the end when the thing's already built and nobody has the resources, the money, or really the appetite to go back and redo everything. One thing you can do is follow this International Code of Practice. So this is an ISO standard, and it's a good one. It's not a technical standard. It's a standard that tells you the things you need to consider in order to integrate accessibility practices into your ICT products and services. As an organization, what do you need to do? And there are a number of high-level things you can do. I'm going to cover quickly. I'm going to mention 6 of them. That is, first one, motivation. Why is accessibility important to your organization? Is it the legal risk? Or is it just because it's required by the Human Rights Act that you not discriminate against disabled users in your provision of information and resource and services? That could be. Is it because of the ethical reasons? It's just the right thing to do, to include people as much as possible. Perhaps it's because of the investment you've made in the online channel. We're saving lots of money, and that's one of the reasons we go online. But if we're not meeting the needs of our disabled users, they have to come to us and try and access those same services through call centers, costs lots of money, through face-to-face, so now you have to have staff and a desk, costs lots of money, or through the post. Now you have to accommodate people sending in forms and all of that, and then digitizing that yourself somehow costs lots of money. So maybe that's the reason. It's really good to get a sense of why. For the designers, maybe it's because accessibility and constraints around designing for disabled users really spurs on innovation. Things like the typewriter, the telephone, even the internet itself were designed by and for disabled people. We can talk about that more if you have questions. You need to establish who's responsible in your organization. Who are your accessibility champions? At the executive level, you really need somebody at the executive level, someone who holds the budget pen, to make sure that accessibility is a primary fundamental principle for your organization, and to decide how they're going to fund a program of action associated with that. Who's responsible? Who can you go to make sure that everybody has what they need? You need to ask those questions. Who has the accessibility skills in-house? What skills are we lacking? How are we going to help staff increase their competence in accessibility? Will we send them out to training? Maybe we'll have more accessibility Huis or training sessions, for example, where we can learn about how to create accessible content. You know, are those training sessions budgeted for? What do you do when you come up against a problem and need support and you don't have that support in-house? Maybe you have an arrangement with an external provider. I always recommend having some kind of ongoing support plan with an external provider where you can, whenever you need it, call them up, send them an email, get some impromptu, quick accessibility advice. But the idea is you need to have a plan about maintaining your website and maintaining your accessibility support. You want to include this stuff in your policies, high-level policies, for example, policies around hiring, policies around procurement of IT. You should have a baseline accessibility policy. What baseline degree of accessibility are all of your web pages going to meet? Maybe you don't need to aim right away for all of WCAG compliance. Maybe you can say all of our web content is going to have good text alternatives and good keyboard access, good heading structure, and then move on from there as you get better. I mentioned procurement, policies for marketing and brand, style guide, that kind of thing, all important to have. And then finally, governance. How are you going to monitor, assess, and hold products and services accountable for their accessibility, right? You need to have some way of monitoring and knowing where your stuff is accessible, where it's not accessible, and having a plan to review your processes in order to improve those so that you can rest assured that future stuff is made accessible. Again, the deal is accessibility is difficult. We don't need to fool ourselves, but integrating this stuff into your practices is what's critical. And so you really need that organizational level of direction and purpose. That means getting management support and budget, a team, whether it's in-house or outsourced, that has accessibility skills, and then policies that do that, and ways to monitor and to react to accessibility assessments that you perform. So sorry about going over a little bit there, but that's that. Were there any questions? There I see one question from Hope. I mentioned the top 3 things we could do to make our website information more accessible. The alt text for all was one, and full keyboard. Yeah, so full keyboard access, that's really just about making sure that not only can a keyboard user get to every interactive component on a page, which typically they do by using the tab key. So they'll press the tab key and that will take them from link to link, to button, to form field, checkboxes, or any other interactive things that typically work with a mouse. Sometimes these things might be developed, they might be custom. Or you might have a map, for example, the controls on a map to zoom in or pan, all that sort of thing needs to be able to be used by a keyboard user. So that's what keyboard access really means. Another key aspect of keyboard access is making sure that it's visually clear what button or link or control on the page currently has keyboard focus, so that I know that when I press enter, it's going to activate that thing. If I can't tell what link or button currently has keyboard focus, I don't know where my focus is, and I don't know what pressing enter is going to do. So those are the primary considerations around keyboard focus. The third one was about heading hierarchy. So we all know that headings are important. We need to chunk our content on a page, break it up into sections, and each section should have a heading. And Sighted users find this valuable because it makes it easier for them to scan the content. They can see what each section is about quickly. They can see what all the sections are. They can see what sections are part of larger sections. So they can tell that that heading is the top level heading because it's biggest and boldest. That heading is slightly smaller, so that's a subsection. And then this third heading is even slightly smaller still. So it's a nested subsection. So we need a way, first of all, to represent that structure to people who can't see the screen. So for that, we make sure that all of our headings use actual heading markup. That would be H1, H2, H3, and so on. But those numbers represent the level, the hierarchy, the nesting level of those headings. And so it's important to maintain or apply the proper heading level so that that heading hierarchy that we see visually is programmatically available. If, for example, a screen reader user is just looked at it knows they're reading a level 2 heading because the screen reader said level 2 heading, and then all of a sudden the next heading is an H5 or a 5th level heading, they're going to get confused. They're going to wonder why, did I just jump to a H5? Have I missed content? Or worse, maybe they go from an H2 and then the subsection, it looks smaller. What's the third level heading looks smaller, looks to be a third level heading, but actually it's been marked up as just a div with some bold attributes attached. It's not a heading at all. Or it's an H1 when it should be an H3. That kind of change in the heading hierarchy can be really confusing to someone who relies on that structure being programmatically exposed to them through assistive technology. Right, so Q&A, I'm just going to try and find the Q&A. So that was the question from Hope. I hope I answered that one. Were there any other questions? No open questions. All right, well, I'll end there. But as I think Matt mentioned earlier, if you want to ask any questions, there's web.standards@DIA that you can come to. And we're offering fortnightly drop-in clinics, but given the current situation on the ground, we're canceling those. But I am making myself available if you have any questions about web standards or accessibility, even if it's, this piece of content I've just created or our website main menu. We're not sure if it's accessible. Even if technical questions like that, I'm happy to look at those. Email web.standards@dia.govt.nz, and then we can arrange how best we want to talk about those and try and solve your questions, whether that's through phone, email, or Zoom even. So with that, I'll leave it there and hand it back to you, Matt. Thanks a lot.
Unmute. Start video. Share screen. Thank you so much, Jason. Every time I get to hear Jason speak, I get to learn a new thing and take another thing away. As you can see, that the spectrum and depth and breadth of things that Jason knows are both wide and deep, it's a never-ending journey to learn more and more and more, and you can get good at the basics and then good at the stuff on top. It's worth noting that a lot of the stuff that Jason was talking about are actually inside your control. Sorry, I just remembered I should be facing my mouth towards the microphone. A lot of the things that Jason is talking about hierarchy of headings and structure, those are the things that you all will start doing when you start creating a document inside Microsoft Word. So those things are not technical things that get controlled by people in the website team. Those are things that you can control when you are authoring content inside Microsoft Word. It's also worth noting that, sorry, put my screen onto full screen. There we go. The slides that Jason has just gone through, sorry, there's a chat. Thanks, Jason. The slides that Jason shared are linked to from the slide deck. The link was on and the link to this slide deck was back here, WCC wellington.govt.nz/access-hui will get you to this slide deck, and inside the slide deck you can find a link to Jason's slide deck. So next up we have Jane Hadaway. Jane is the team leader of the website team. So it's her and her team who look after wellington.govt.nz. They're the ones that if you have changes to the website or content to add to the website or functionality to add to the website, it's Jane's team that you interact with. So I'm going to pass over to Jane, and she's going to take this seat here.
Hi, so as you can see, the website team's purpose is for the site wellington.govt.nz to deliver empowering, reliable and purposeful content and fully integrated services so that our online customers can easily carry out tasks and get useful information about the council's services and facilities. So one of our principles in order to achieve that is that we make our content accessible. We do that by using plain language. We write alternative text for images and graphs that communicate important information. We encourage captions for all video and audio content. So the creative and brand team, I think, now have that in their brief. So they look after that. We use headings correctly. We format tables using row and column headings to make them more accessible. We optimize PDFs, and we carry out usability testing on new content. So another thing that we do is that every year ALGIM, which is the Associated Local Government Information Management Organisation, they carry out an audit of the council websites throughout the country. So as part of that audit, they look at accessibility. Our score on the accessibility was low this year. They've introduced a new automated accessibility tool. So what we're doing is we're breaking down the accessibility issues identified, and we're working through them. And we also are working on a project, an upcoming look and feel redesign project, which will address many of the design issues. So another thing that we are helping address is this report from Access Advisors in 2018. This is more at an organisational level. It contains 12 principles, and you might see, for example, assign an accessibility champion. That's obviously out of our scope, so these are more aimed at the organisation as a whole. But principles that we are helping to address is establishing a baseline of accessibility and introducing some automated measuring and monitoring. Matt's also had been responsible for accessibility training modules, which we'll be talking about more later on. So we've also set up an accessibility working group within our team. So they look at best practice in the accessibility arena, and they're looking through various accessibility recommendations to improve the website. And they're starting to target accessibility on the most popular 50 pages. So another thing that we do, we focus on improving readability and plain English across the site. At times we use tools such as Hemingway Editor and Microsoft Word's readability scores. So Hemingway Editor, it just looks at your content and it gives it a grade level. It looks at the passive tense, it looks at how long your sentences are. So none of this is highly technical. You can all do it with your documents. Or alternatively, you can use Word and use the readability stats there. And we're trying to aim at a Flesch Kincaid grade level of about 7 or 8, which is like the 12 to 15-year-olds. So apparently in America, the 80% of the audience will be able to read level 8. So we're trying to aim at a reading level of 7 to 8. So another thing that we have been doing is retiring tools that don't support accessibility and using tools that do. For example, we were using an online form app called Pipeform, but it wasn't accessible. So we have continued and used even a more Survey Gizmo tool, which is an online form tool, which is more accessible. So another thing that we're working on is redesigning the look and feel of the site with a focus on inclusivity. So included in our statement of work is the requirement that we're going to be improving website accessibility compliance and improving on that LGIM rating that I referred to earlier. So, and concepts and final designs are going to be tested against and must meet the WCAG standards that Jason referred to at a AA level. So the other thing that we're doing, which Matt is going to talk about more, is encouraging and promoting and doing ourselves the accessibility modules on Wharekura that are going to be introduced. The other things that we're doing, we're including accessibility testing in our development process. And Kyal is going to speak more about that because he helps us with this testing. We're also building a tool so that anything that was built for the redesign project has to meet accessibility standards before it can progress any further. So in these ways, we're trying to bake in accessibility from the start rather than trying to retrofit it on a 2012 design, which is what we're trying to do at the moment. So that's me. Questions? What is the team's goal for the next accessibility audit? Okay, so I think that's a really good question, and I wouldn't want to put a figure on it. It might be what I would like to see is though it obviously to go up. It may be more of a phased going up. So with this redesign project, it goes through to June this year. And the next accessibility audit might be done in May. So I think that the redesign project will improve accessibility to a degree, but the project will continue on, I suspect, later in the year, and accessibility score will continue to increase. So I don't want to put a figure on it, but I am determined that there is that it goes uphill.
Thanks, Jane. So it's worth explicitly mentioning as well that the Access Advisors report that Jane spoke about, that was proactively sourced by the website team. So they went to Access Advisors, who are a subdivision of the Blind and Low Vision Foundation. And that was talking about all roads leading back to Jason Kiss. That was actually when Jason Kiss was working. Sorry, I need to keep my face towards the microphone. That was when Jason was actually working at the Blind and Low Foundation, Low Vision Foundation, and so the report was co-authored by Jason, funnily enough. Also, the question about the rating. So I've had a lot to do with ALGIM over the years, and I can tell you that their accessibility rating is done based on automated tools. So they get a robot or an automated tool to go and do an audit of a website. And it's worth noting that if you pick 12 different accessibility auditing tools, you'll get 12 different scores of how accessible a thing is, which is why in 2019, wellington.govt.nz, well, sorry, that's not the single reason. There's a bunch of stuff that can be improved, but that was one of the main things is they changed the tool that they were using in 2019. So it picked up a whole bunch of errors that before that had not been obvious to the website team. And some of those, and whenever you do an automated test, some errors are actually false positives. So when you look more closely at them, they're not necessarily as bad as it sounds. So next up we have Kyal from the contact center. So Kyal, as I mentioned at the start, is a customer service representative. So if you call the contact center, there is a chance that you will get to Kyal. And it's worth mentioning that Kyal, I'll pass over to Kyal anyway. So I just need to do a little bit of technical whizzy doodle to switch the video to be pointing at Kyal. Stand by. Now, can someone tell me if you can you see Kyal on the screen now? Great. And then I'm going to switch the microphone to be Kyal. If Kyal, you can just test your audio.
Okay, can you give me a thumbs up, a hands up if you can see me? Would be good.
Great. Participants are raising their hands.
Participants, you can now put your hands down.
Great, thanks everyone. Okay, so first of all, my name is Kyal, and like Matt said, I work in the contact centre. I've worked there for about 18 months at this stage. And yeah, so that's me. I would just like to thank the website team for inviting me to participate in this Accessibility Hui. It's great to be able to contribute and be a part of what they do. So I'm here to talk to you about the accessibility of JAWS, which is a screen reading software on the website. But before I do that, I'll just give you a bit of background information about myself. I have a vision impairment, which is called Leber's congenital amaurosis. There's quite a few different forms of this vision impairment, but basically for me, it means my eyesight is completely peripheral. I can only see sideways. I have no forward vision. This means I can see for about 3 meters in a direction. That's kind of how far my vision goes. But it also, there are a lot of other factors, such as it doesn't do well on small details, so like facial expression, stuff like that, small print, all those types of things are pretty much hard, impossible for me to see. So the bigger the object is, the easier it is for me to see, sorry. So I generally tell people apart by how big they are, the clothes they wear, their hair color, things that are more noticeable rather than kind of their facials. So for me, accessibility has been a big part of my life because it's very much affected how I can do and what I can do. I started off with using Braille, which I believe Jason mentioned briefly, using that to read and write. When I started high school, I got a Braille computer called Braille Note. Back then it was worth around $15,000 New Zealand, so luckily I managed to get funding for that. And then I moved on to using a laptop. So you're probably wondering how I managed to use a laptop. Well, the answer is JAWS. JAWS stands for Job Access with Speech. And basically what that is it's a screen reader that reads whatever's on the computer screen, such as Word, Excel, Outlook, web pages, and different software programs, which allows me to basically get whatever's displayed on the screen and have it read out to me in a voice, which allows me to access a computer like everyone else with full eyesight. So this very much, JAWS basically depends on everyone who designs these types of systems to make them accessible, making my life a lot easier and more able to do the things that everyone else does. For example, it was because of this that how JAWS works with these programs. It allowed me to go to university and get my marketing and management degree. It allows me to go to work and basically use a computer like everyone else. Just bear with me a minute. So I'm just having a look here. Yeah, so doing my job, I use JAWS. At the contact center, we use a wide range of different programs, such as Confirm, Outlook, Excel, and then there's Teamwork and the website, Soak, and all these programs have different levels of accessibility. Some are really good, and some are not so good. Confirm is accessible, Word, Excel, Outlook, the website, all those work fine, but then there are some other ones like Teamwork and the such as like the building bookings software, those sorts of things which are not so accessible. So there are some things I'm able to do because it works, and there's some things I can't due to accessibility issues. So doing my job, I have JAWS, which comes out of a headset, such as the one I'm wearing now. It comes through here and it reads whatever's displayed on the screen. And I also have the customer, when they call up, also coming through this headset. So I get both JAWS and a customer at the same time. So I've got to be very good at listening to hear exactly what's going on the screen and also what the customer is talking about. Some days I can get a bit of a headache from having both of them in my ear the whole day, but it's just part of the job. yeah, the customer is not able to hear JAWS. It just comes through the headset. So they don't know of a vision impairment. They don't know that there's also a voice going on in the background that's reading out the what's displayed on the screen. Only I get that information because it's run through the computer, not through the telephone system. So this brings me to what I'm here to show you. So just bear with me a minute and I'm going to get it displayed on the screen. Wellington City Council.
I'm just going to make sure that it's on the screen and I'm checking what it's plugged into. HDMI 2, source. There we go.
Wellington. Okay, bear with me. JAWS is probably going to be a bit loud, so feel free to turn the volume down if it is too loud for you. Basically, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pretend that I'm a customer and also that I'm a CSR and navigating the website for a customer. So they might call up and, for example, they might want to do a property search on, let's say, 12 Blackrock Road, and they want to know how much their rates are. So for me, I will push H,
popular links,
and it goes to popular links because that's a heading.
List of 6 link properties.
And I can scroll to popular links and push
Enter. New tab page. Clicks connection.
Oh, and we have no
It's net
internet.
trouble.
Yep.
With the task file. Task level. Enter. V. I. C. A. L. C. S. C. Enter.
That's what we're doing now again.
Maori.
So
Mail.
can I just
English
check
left
your
escape.
Wi-Fi?
Yeah, it was
So,
working.
yeah, sorry, I think it's.
Key. View connection settings button. V.
I think you are now.
Not so.
Okay. Sorry about that.
With taskbar words with web property dash property center. Leaving menu.
So we've got property search up here.
Property search by a proper edit.
It's got a 12.
1 2 space BL CA space R. Enter. Property search by address. List and properties. Personal detail. Withholding person. List of 6 icon address 12 Blackrock Road, Newlands.
We have all the details popped up here, which I am able to read through with JAWS.
Heading blank. Heading level 2 summary. Blank a capital value.
So we've got the capital value.
Dollar for rates dash.
Rates.
Dollars current 1 July account 10 account 1
Information that's on display
base.
on the screen. We'll read out with JAWS. So this form here is really accessible. It's really easy for me to use. If I get customers calling up, I can access it totally fine. But let's have a look at some other things.
12 click search edit ROAD space ORAS enter.
Roadworks.
Search edit roadwork search button enter.
Let's bring that up.
Enter quick links list of all links current address 12 Blackrock blank. Page up 12 is 6 visit link public input alt plus 6. Quick search.
Internet's going very slow.
Search alt plus search at roadworks dash visited enter roadworks dash roadworks.
So this was a tool that was implemented by the website team, which I was a part of the testing of it when it came out last year. Previously, we had a PDF of all roadworks that were taking place in the city, which was in a PDF. PDFs are not the most accessible format to have, especially when it's a really big PDF. I believe the roadworks bulletin was 20 to 100 pages. I can't remember exactly how many, but trying to find a particular street, and that was almost impossible. So we have this roadworks bulletin, which I could type in a street and it will pop up with all the works that were happening in that street. Really accessible, really easy to use. Unfortunately, with some sort of update recently, it's not working at the moment. So I'm working on the website team with it at the moment to try and figure out what's going on with that. But that was something that I was involved in and started, was in testing, which was really good to use. And it's one of the improvements that they made. So, another example is
quick search edit.
water fountains.
Enter. Search button enter.
Just bear with me a minute because it seems to be taking a while to load. There we go.
Water dash drinking link 8 heading level 3 link enter. Water dash drinking. Water dash
So we
drinking.
have a customer wanting to know where the water fountains are in the city. We
Water dash.
bring this up.
List water list of.
Try and find out where they are. Let the customer know.
For an address in drinking fountains heading blank. Fresh. Blank fresh blank. Drinking fountains frame. Main every massive main.
So it's a map which has no description, no text on it at all. So we're not able to, I'm not able anyways to give the customer any information about where the water fountains are. I'll show you what JAWS reads it as, just for an example.
Every NASA, NGA, USGS vertical bar lids, stats NZ, Eagle Technology, every year Garmin, media / NASA, USGS.
That's how JAWS reads the map. So it tells you pretty much nothing at all. So if a customer wants to know anything about that, I would definitely not be able to help them.
List 6, link, visit, link, layer, and quick search, edit.
But I can give you an example of a better map. Just give me a second here.
UBLRC-OIELLELES. Enter. Public toilets. Full search button. Full search result. Public toilets in visited and enter. Public toilets in Wellington heading level 3 link visited. Public toilets in Wellington. Public list of Coronado public toilet graphic blank heading level to report link. Public main with zoom.
So here we do have text alongside the map, which is great.
1-3 main public blank table logo no zipper yes. Bolino Bay open up no 6 acre amber.
So for example, Beerinport, this one here, it tells you that
yes, 24 hours. Yeah, we're amber -33 Luxford Street.
That is at 33 Luxford Street, which is great because if you had a phone that had GPS on it, you could find exactly where that was because like Jason mentioned, iPhones and Android phones have a speech system on it which can read out information like maps and stuff like that, so you can find out where things are. And this one has a precise address, so if I had a customer on the phone, I could tell them exactly where it is.
6 ago, Bolino Bay.
This one
open hours, Bolino Bay Evans Bay Parade.
Bolino Bay Evans Bay Parade. This one doesn't tell you anything about where it is. It just says it's in that area. So I give them that information, but if they wanted more precise details, I wouldn't be able to give them much help apart from that. So this one is a lot better than the water fountain map, but it probably could still use some tweaking to make it even more accessible if you want to do that. There are a lot of other maps on here. Some of them, you know, are not possible to make accessible just due to the nature of what they are. For example, you have the water and drainage maps, which has a lot of detail, different color lines for different types of pipes, such as stormwater pipes, wastewater pipes, and just normal main water pipes. I don't think you could make that accessible, no matter how hard you tried. But there are other maps, such as the ones I've just shown you, the CCTV maps with CCTV cameras around the city. Those don't change. They are pretty much stationary. There's not a million of them, so you could easily have a description of where they are, have some information about numbers, all that sort of thing, which probably a customer would want to know. And there are other ones too, such as maps of where the playgrounds are across the city, stuff like that, which also doesn't change. It's stationary. There's no reason you couldn't have a description alongside the map outlining where those things are as well.
There's a question that's come in from one of the viewers, which is, how do you change between JAWS talking to you and having to talk to the customer?
So generally I have a very good idea of where things are. So I quite often don't need to use JAWS because I'm pretty sure of how to get to where I need to get to. Quite often when I'm on the customer, talking to the customer, I'm typing notes. So I can touch type, which means I don't actually need to have JAWS input when I'm using it. And a lot of it's just hearing the customer and then writing or navigating and trying to talk to the customer at the same time. So it's just being able to be really good at multitasking, really, or, you know, being quick, I guess, at getting to where I need to get to, so that if I'm not talking and they're not talking, there's not much of a gap or quiet period between those silences. Hope that answers your question. That pretty much brings me to the end of what I came to show you. There are of course, more kind of areas of accessibility and things that are not accessible on the map if you look for, on the website if you look for them, but those are the ones that have stood out to me when I've been doing that work for the website team, and also being dealing with customers on the phone. So I just would like to thank the website team again for helping me help out and test those sorts of things, because that's definitely a passion of mine. I'm really passionate about accessibility because it really does make a difference. And I have had a few other people across council wanting my input around work they're doing, and asking for me to have a look at what they're working on as well. And I'm happy to help out. So if you want to, feel free to send me an email or come and have a chat.
We have another question. What do you do when something isn't accessible on the website?
I generally have a chat to the website team and see if we can fix it. I mean, I guess it's a matter of just working together with everyone. Sometimes you just need to find a way around it. So there might be another solution, or I can create my own kind of Word document if it's around information. Yeah, I guess it's a matter of just working together with everyone to find a solution, or seeing if I can come up with my own workarounds, because having a vision impairment, I've had to become quite good at finding alternative ways of doing things in order for that to be possible.
There's a question, another question from Alex, which I'll add to. So Alex asks, thanks Kyal, very interesting. Just wondering if you can tell us about a site you use that you find really accessible, which was almost the exact same question I had, which is tell us about a site that's really accessible, tell us about a site that's really not accessible, and then maybe industries that are generally quite accessible and industries that aren't.
It's kind of hard to pinpoint a website that isn't accessible, because I tend to avoid them. So I don't have like a clear, like some clear websites that are not accessible, because I don't tend to use them. I guess an example for me of struggling with accessibility on websites is Christmas last year. I wanted to buy something online for a Christmas present, and I tried 2 different websites, both totally different for different industries, and both of them were completely inaccessible, and so I was unable to buy what I wanted to. So for me, that's really frustrating, especially because it's easier for me to go and buy it online rather than have to go and find it in a shop. So that, I guess, is a bit of a struggle. Accessible websites, I find Wellington City Council's website in the list of websites to be quite easy to use. So, I mean, I've had no real issues using it. I found it easy to pick up, easy to kind of figure out where things are. It's formatted well with headings. The tables are good to use. The PDFs are good on it. For example, some places put up PDFs that are images or photos, which of course aren't accessible. Most of the ones I've come across on the website are actual text PDFs. So usually Jaws can handle those pretty well. I guess if I was to pick a website off the top of my head, I do a little bit of online shopping, and I use a website called Mighty Ape, and I'm able to use that fine without any issues to search for products, buy products, get information on what's going on, chat to their staff if I need to. I have no accessibility issues with that website. So that's just picking a random one off the top of my head.
And there's one other question. Have you tried any other screen reader software? Second question, is JAWS the best?
I guess JAWS being the best probably depends on who you ask. It is one of the most popular ones out there. It's one of the ones that's most widely used. It's constantly in development, so they have a new version out every year, which is great. The issue with JAWS is that, as Jason mentioned, it costs a lot of money. It's about $2,000. You usually, depending on the package you buy, only get about free upgrades. So every like three or so years, you have to buy a new version, which for a lot of people is not doable. there is funding out there, so I managed to get funding so I can use it at university when I did my degree. And there's also work funding, so I can get it to use it at work at my previous job and also at the Wellington City Council. So I think it is one of the best because it's constantly being developed to keep up with advancing technologies. I would say it's the best, but there are other ones out there. I haven't tried them. I do use iPhone with VoiceOver on it, and that works really well. That's really accessible. There's also NVDA, as Jason mentioned, or WindowEyes. I haven't tried those ones, so I don't know kind of how user-friendly they are, but I'm happy with JAWS.
There's another question. Hi, Kyle. Are there any online maps that you've found that work well with JAWS?
The best maps I found is Google Maps. So I use Google Maps on my iPhone. And so that has a speech, it works over with VoiceOver. So it reads what pops up on the screen. So example, if you're walking down the street and you go past number 26 on Adelaide Road, it'll read 26 Adelaide Road. So you know where you are and you can follow where you are by touching the screen, and it has like a little icon there that says, you know, your location is blah. And it also, by touching the map, you can very much work out where the corners are, where you need to turn, what streets you need to go down. It's really well displayed, not just visually, but by touch and by sound as well. So that would probably be the best map that I've come across is just the Google Maps on your phone. But I have used a GPS map quite a few years ago called Navigun, which was all right. It was mostly just that it would tell you the directions to go down, just like a normal kind of GPS would. It wasn't as well displayed as Google Maps.
There's another question. Is the new ability to work remotely easier for you to carry out your work, or does it make no difference? It will probably be the same for me. Working at home, working at work, I'll be doing the same work. So in that way, it doesn't make a difference. On a personal level, I have children and a family. So in that way, it's actually going to be easier because it's easier for me to drop the kids off at school. So personally, it does make a difference, but accessibility wise, or, you know, in that kind of area, it doesn't. But I mean, if I did have issues getting to work or something like that, or, you know, public transport was a problem, depending on where I lived and where, you know, work was, having that option probably would be a big help. So I can see that depending on like your environment or circumstances, that working from home, if you had some sort of access need, could be quite helpful. And another question, Carl, the question is, are the maps on our website generally accessible? Or maybe another quick question would be, what percentage of the maps on the website are accessible or not accessible?
Generally, they're not accessible, is the short answer. Just because they're all visually displayed, and they don't usually have any kind of descriptive narrative alongside the maps. So the websites are generally not accessible.
And to be explicit, your preference is to have a text and or table equivalent of the map adjacent to the map.
I think that would be the easiest solution. I don't know how difficult it would be to come up with something like Google Maps that could read alongside, could read the details of the map. I don't know how difficult or easy that would be. I think the simplest solution would be to have a key or descriptive narrative alongside it that would read it out. That would be a good first step, I reckon.
And I have a question, Carl. When you use Google Maps, I've seen you use Google Maps on your phone, and it was surprising how you use it. When do you use Google Maps on your laptop or desktop computer? And if so, is it accessible on your laptop or desktop computer?
I've never tried it, so I don't know the answer to that question. I guess mostly because I don't tend to walk around the streets with my laptop. So I don't know how well it would be, how easy it would be to use it on the laptop. It's definitely something worth trying and finding out, because if it is, then maybe that could be a good kind of approach to go down for the maps that we use. But yeah, it works really well on the phone, but I don't know about the laptop or computer.
Do you mind giving us a 2-minute demo of what Google Maps on your phone is like for you?
Yeah, sure. Give me a second.
So my motivation for this, so while you're getting set up, Kyal,
Yep.
my motivation for this is in the same way that the first time you see someone on a screen reader is mind-blowing, the same thing when you see Kyal using Google Maps on his phone.
So I'm going to turn it so hopefully you guys can see. Can you see my phone?
It's small, but they can get the gist of it.
Okay, cool. So maps, we click here.
Maps, compass, heading, my location, 226 Lambton Key.
So this is around the key, but we just
the terrace, north south, the terrace, north south, course to south, the terrace, Salamander.
See if I touch the roads, it'll read the roads, and it tells you your location. I quite often use this when I'm on the bus. So when I'm on the bus, it will read out kind of which roads I'm going down, which is great to kind of know exactly where I am if I am in an area that I'm not really familiar with and can't read the road signs. So
search for a place or address.
I can also search for an address. I won't do that now because I already work here. But if I search for an address, it'll tell me, you know, go 200 meters down the road. I walk 200 meters, and it will say turn left or right, and I can turn left or right to kind of go in the right direction. So that works quite well as well.
There's a question here, Kyal, but I'm not sure it's for you as much as for perhaps people listening. So the question is, for the GIS team listening, would you like the opportunity to, or would you, Kyal, like the opportunity to work with them to make maps accessible? But perhaps it's a question for the business units whose data is on maps as well, because I understand that it's not just the GIS team who make maps, it will be on behalf of business units who have data that then go on the map. So what, in your mind, Kyal, how do we progress with having visual versions of maps and structured data versions of maps?
Like I said, I think that the first step would be to have a brief description on those maps that can have a description, that are not overly complicated, and then maybe looking at what Google Maps does, or some other, maybe searching through some other types of maps that other organizations use and seeing how accessible those are, and finding a good platform that works well and is good for accessibility, and moving from there and trying to develop that for us. Like I said, I'm more than happy to be involved in accessibility and help accessibility in any way for any of the different business units in council. So I'm always just an email away if you want to have a chat.
Great, thank you. So there are no more questions. So I think that is the end of Kyl's presentation. Thank you so much, Kyal.
I'm lucky last. I'm going to play a little video. Alt text has been mentioned a few times in this presentation. It's worth mentioning that to be explicit, alt text are descriptions that you give to images. So if you have an image on a page, you would give it alt text, and that is how someone on a screen reader would experience the image. This is a funny little video from the Blind Low Vision New Zealand organisation about alt text and how we can all contribute to it. Oops, sorry. I just realized I've got to do another little technical thing to make it easier for people to listen at home. Stand by. Audio. Select same as system.
It seems that you humans like pictures. Hashtag thumbs up. I can tell you that you share more than 6.6 billion of them every day. Because I am a computer. And I am smart. You love to take photos of your mom and dad, your kids, your other kids, your first car, your first accident, your new car, your friends, your butt, your boyfriend, your ex-boyfriend, your new boyfriend, your face. Actually, definitely mostly of your own face. Hello, my name is caring. In a world where everything is snapped, shared, and posted, it's my job to describe images on the internet for people who can't see them. I can confirm it is currently a pretty boring experience. Example. Image may contain outdoor. Image may contain 1208_89.jpg. Image may contain food. You see my point? That's why Blind and Low Vision NZ have launched alt text for all. Each image you upload to the internet has accessible functionality called alt text. Used well, it enables people who can't see your image to experience it through a screen reader. But to make it work, it requires everyone to help. So that means when there's breaking world news, and breaking world news, we can all participate in the way the world communicates. Search alt text for all today and help me to open up the world for people who are blind or have low vision. Please, because I am deeply, deeply, deeply bored.
Switching my audio back to the microphone.
So something that's worth making explicit is in there that is implicit, I think, is that Google is blind. So if you don't describe your images, it's not just people who are using screen readers, but it's Google, and any computer that is trying to search the internet won't know what the content is. And that goes for all of the stuff that we've been talking about, is that the more accessible you make your content, the better websites will perform in Google, which is more often than not the first place where people start their journey on the web. So alt text, if you go to the alt text for all website from the Blind and Low Vision Foundation, they have some pretty good explainers about alt text on social media. So as an example, if you use Twitter, God forbid if you do, but if you do use Twitter, you can go into your own settings and click on the accessibility tab, and in there turn on the option to be able to add alt text to images. So whenever you upload an image, you will then be given the option to give it alt text. So anyone who is on a screen reader will have a better experience. This is LinkedIn. When you upload an image to LinkedIn, you'll see down the bottom left, it has add alt text. I don't use Facebook and Instagram, so but those tools also have similar options, and you can find information about that. So it's just worth remembering, now you know what the words alt text mean, you can keep your eyes peeled for it, and when you see it, you can add it in there, because it's for a raft of reasons, but mostly just that it is the humane, pleasant, friendly thing to do so that others can consume the web in the same way that you do. Then I Googled around for what does alt text look like, good and bad, and it's worth noting I asked Jane and the website team, you sometimes get images inside documents and web pages where you are not able to describe the image. And it is sometimes the case that you're looking at an image and you can see what it is from a simple perspective, but a subject matter expert will be able to provide much more context. And I'll go through some examples about this, and then we can talk about some, each of us individually, how we can do that. So, and Kyle, this game is less fun for you, but we have an image on the screen, and then we're going to go through a bad alt text, a better alt text, and then a good alt text, a good alt text. So bad, better, good. So a bad alt text description would be bird, right? Better alt text would be rooster, and even better would be a red-crested rooster crowing. So, and I heard someone describe it recently to say, how would you describe this image over the telephone to someone if they couldn't see the image you're looking at, right? So again, here, if you showed this image to someone in, let's say, Alabama, right? They wouldn't, we actually know more about this image than someone in Alabama does. So a bad description would be person. The person in Alabama would probably be able to say person giving thumbs up, but we are uniquely placed compared to the person in Alabama to say a Wellington City Council parking warden wearing a sun hat giving the thumbs up gesture, right? So we can actually flesh out that image in a way that someone might not be able to do. And so then if each of us think about what is the thing that you know more about than the average population. And I was thinking about it last night while I was going to bed, and I was thinking, I'm not sure what I know about that other people don't know about. But then I thought, as an example, if there was a screenshot of a video game from the mid-90s, I could tell you, well, that's from this video game and this year when they're trying to do this thing, right? And you could, where as opposed to someone else would say, it's a video game question mark. So each of us will have little things where we can flesh out the description of what you're looking at, whether it's naming the person, naming the action, naming the context, to clearly explain what's going on inside the image. So that's something that all subject matter experts and document creators inside the council can be doing. So here are the take-home actions for all of us. As of this week on Wharekura, and if we all end up working from home soon, Wharekura is going to be the place to be. But there are now 5 modules on Wharekura, and the link is there. But you can just go straight to Wharekura. And thank you to Bridie and Joe and those in the OD team who have helped us get these up. There are 5 modules inside Wharekura on accessible content. Before or after you've done those modules, when you open Microsoft Word, or when you're creating a document, or when you're creating content, there are questions that you can ask yourself. Who is this for? And these, in some ways, someone from the comms team would say, these are basic questions we should be thinking about every time we create any content. Who is this content for? What are they trying to do? Where will it be published? How many different places will it be published? What can we do to make it accessible? And also going to Kyle's point about the maps, and I've used a funny word here, and maybe it's not the right word, but what's the purest version of the content? So when you put dots on a map, that's, there is a whole bunch of design decisions that have been made that's how we want to present the information. But the purest or rawest or simplest version of the content is a table with rows and columns that describe what is going to be on the map. And the point is, it doesn't need to be either or, it should be both, and that they should be complementary to each other. And this is on behalf of the website team or anyone on a screen reader. We can't do much with a PDF or a scanned document. If that's the content that you're passing, there's just so few options that can be done if that's the raw ingredients that you're passing to content publishers. So when you're creating Microsoft Word documents, don't manually change headings using the little font styles such as bold, italics. So as an example, if you're making a top level heading for the document, don't select 96 point font, bold, and your favorite font. What you should do is use predefined styles. So those have, it's called a semantic meaning, right? So if you give it a heading value, which is to say this is a heading, it's not 86 point Calibri, bold, italics, underlined, it's a heading too. So if it's published over there, maybe it's Calibri or Arial or Helvetica, or it's just audible inside a screen reader, right? Because visually, bold, italics, Calibri, those things don't have any meaning from a semantic perspective, if that makes sense. So the semantic point is it's a heading too. Visually, it might look like anything, or it might look like nothing. And then this is a really hard one, because I think often, and in some ways it's the epitome of one of our Achilles heels at the council, is we think about publishing, we think about the end of the project, the final document, the final artifact, when we can dust our hands off and say that the project is done. When you produce a document, that even the final version of the document, or the final version of the document, or the final 2 version of the document, or final 2 with amendments version of the document, inevitably it's not going to be the final version of the document. It keeps on living, right? And so often we think, I finished my document, I'll email them to Creative and Brand, they're going to produce a beautiful PDF from it, we'll bung the PDF on the website, and then if it changes weeks later, we'll get them to change the PDF, right? But then on the other side of town, you've created an accessible version of that document on the website or somewhere else, and you'll remember to change your beautiful PDF, which is on the website, but you won't remember to change the accessible version, which is also published adjacent to it. And it kind of goes back to a challenge that we have internally, which is knowing where the single source of truth is. That in a perfect world, the beautiful PDF and the accessible version of the document, if robots were running the world, they would be produced from the single source of truth, and we would only ever change the single source of truth. But because we don't live in that utopia, you have to think about where are all the different places where this has been published, where are all the different places where I need to make updates if this document changes. And also, just to reiterate for the third time, the accessibility modules. So we, from now, we haven't actually worked out an end date, but let's say 4 weeks from now, someone will need to do the maths on that. 4 weeks from now, we have a Prezi card worth $50. Every module that you complete, every accessibility module you complete will be an entry into the competition. So if you do 5 modules, that's 5 entries into the competition. And we will randomly draw one person from that pile who will win a $50 Prezi card. So if you do 5 modules, that's 5 entries. You've got 4 weeks to do it. Probably going to have a lot of time working from home. So jump into Whare Kura when you've got some time and do the accessibility modules. Stand by. Got an update. The Prezi card's now $100. That's cross-business unit collaboration. So am I going to hand back to you, Kristine? Do you want to say the? Okay, so oh yeah, if I'm just going to check for questions. Oh, we got a question. Yes, so this has been really useful, especially the parts about what we can do to improve accessibility. Is there a source of information that we can refer to for further reading? So there's Whare Kura modules, but also there's a inside Whare Kura, perhaps not today, but by the end of the week, we're adding a checklist. So you can find a checklist on Whare Kura, which is adjacent, sitting right next to all those other modules. Just before I hand back to Kristine, I would like to thank Kristine for organizing this. So we responded to the call, but Kristine's the one who has, you sit inside these siloed teams inside the organization and you chip away at these things that you know that matter, like accessibility. And Kristine is the one who has revealed to everyone in this space that actually we're all chipping away at this thing quietly in our own silos. And so I've been at the council for almost 4 years and no one has unified all of these different business units for a common purpose, the why, for making things accessible. And I really appreciate what you've done, Kristine. I think it's really cool that we can come from different places and share our subject matter expertise, but see how it brings us together as one organization. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass back to Kristine.
See me? Huh? Oh yeah. Thank you everyone for coming. I know that it wasn't as good as being here live, but thank you for your patience with our technology. And obviously I'd really like to thank the web services team for responding with such agility and compassion to make sure that this Hui did take place, because the alternative was to cancel. And that link should be live for a while. I don't know if it will ever not be live, so you can watch it later as well. And I'd really like to thank Kyal for his amazing demonstration. I learned a lot from watching Kyal at work, and it's incredible. And I guess that brings us to the point of all of this, which is that we can all do something to help make sure that our world is more accessible for everybody, because it's basically a human rights issue, isn't it? And thank you, Matt, for thanking me, but it is part of my role at the moment to make sure these Hui take place. The next Hui is in May, and that's going to be led by the place planning team. So stand by for the agenda to come out on that. It's going to be a great one as well. But again, thanks for the digital services team and for Jason Kiss as well for his amazing expertise in guiding us, and for that offer that he extended to us all to go to him for any further questions that we have around accessibility of information. Is that everything? Yeah. All right, great. So thank you, and hopefully next time it will be a live seminar. Probably not though. See ya.
Thanks everybody. I'm going to push the stop button. Thanks for coming. Goodbye.